Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. Many a skirmish I survived when I was young, and many times of war. I remember them well. At 7, I was fostered out by my father, left in charge of my people's lord. King Hrethel kept me and took care of me, was open-handed, behaved like a kinsman. While I was his ward, he treated me no worse as a wean about the place than one of his own boys. For the eldest, Herebeald, an unexpected deathbed was laid out, through a brother's doing. For when Haethcyn bent his horn-tipped bow, and loosed the arrow that destroyed his life, he shot wide and buried a shaft in the flesh and blood of his own brother. Lines 2425 to 2440. Hello and welcome back. Now first, I should say that I have a cold as I record this, and so I'm going to push through it and hope that my voice holds up. If I sound a little bit different, well, that's why. Now, it's fairly agreed upon that Prince Haethcyn's killing of his brother Herebeald is likely connected with the god Hodr's killing of Baldr, and in fact, the second part of Herebeald, the Beowulf, is actually derived from Baldr, and so there's a pretty clear linguistic connection there, as well as thematic. This kind of thing is not terribly unusual, as the stories of men are sometimes brought up to the realm of the gods, and sometimes the stories of the gods are brought down to the realm of men, whether in analogy, kind of dealing with some common themes of the mythos, or even as an attempt to demythologize the divine story and make it more exclusively of a human story. I guess the best thing I could say about this whole process in either direction is, well, it's actually what the Fox says in C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces, that gods and men tend to flow in and out of each other. Now, my intention is not really to propose a thesis regarding what exactly our Christian Anglo-Saxon poet was doing here in some kind of metahistorical or religious sense, but instead to discuss just a bit about the story of Baldr. Now, will this give you some new penetrating insight into Beowulf, or is it going to radically shape your understanding of the story? No, probably not. But there's at least enough of a point of contact here to cast off our ships in order to discuss an important bit of the northern mythos, and to provide you with, or I suppose remind you with if you're already familiar with it, something from the general backdrop of our story, a glimpse into the world behind the world of Beowulf, a taste of the northernness that appealed to folks like Lewis, Tolkien, Wagner, and countless others, very much including me. And so Baldr was a son of Odin the Allfather and the goddess Frigg. Baldr was a great and noble god. He was associated with light, with joy, and with forgiveness, and with peace. In the Prose Edda, which is a collection of Norse myths and legends from the 13th century poet and historian Snorri Sturluson, we're told the following about Baldr. Odin's second son is Baldr, and there is much good to tell about him. He is the best, and all praise him. He is so beautiful and so bright that light shines from him. One plant is so white that it is likened to Baldr's brow. It is the whitest of all plants, and from this you can judge the beauty of both his hair and his body. He is the wisest of the gods. He is also the most beautifully spoken and the most merciful, but one of his characteristics is that none of his decisions is effective. He lives in a place called Breidablik. It is in heaven, and no impurity may be found there. Breidablik it is called, where Baldr has made for himself a hall, in that land where I know there are the fewest perils. And so, Baldr is wise, he is pure, he is good, he is beautiful, and he lives in the great hall of Breidablik, which is the place of the fewest perils, as we're told in Gylfaginning, or as is said in the Grimnismal of the Poetic Edda. Breidablik is the seventh home of Asgard, where Baldr has made a hall for himself. In that land, I know there are the fewest runes of ill omen. And so we clearly see that Baldr is associated with light, with joy, with peace, with mercy, and if we were to give him a season, it would surely be spring. In addition to many other brothers, including Thor and Vali, he had a twin brother named Hodr, who was a blind god associated with winter and darkness. And so, from the beginning, we see some opposing symbolism between these twin brothers, although this does not mean that there was any relational animosity between them. And of course, this competing symbolism is very much going to come up again in a pretty important way. Well, Baldr and Frigga both have a prophetic dream of Baldr's death, and so Frigga attempts to avoid this fate by making every object on Earth vow to never hurt Baldr. But, of course, she neglects to get the assent of one object, mistletoe. Well, the gods gained a new hobby of throwing things at Baldr, knowing that they could not harm him. The mischievous Loki, however, made a spear or an arrow, depending on the version, out of mistletoe, and he gave it to the blind god Hodr, who hurled it at his brother Baldr unto his death. Not desiring to kill his son Hodr directly, Odin had a child, Vali, with the Jotun Rundr, with the purpose of having Vali kill Hodr in vengeance of Baldr. And so here's another connection with the Beowulf story. We have a prince who kills his brother, leaving the king without direct recourse for satisfying the requirements of blood guilt. Baldr was ceremonially burned on his great ship Hringhorni, the largest of all ships, which was befitting of the magnificence of this great and good god. Upon seeing the corpse of Baldr, Nanna, his wife, died of grief, and was added to the funeral pyre with her husband. Thor then blessed the pyre of his burning brother with his hammer Mjolnir. At this time, a dwarf ran before the feet of Thor, and so Thor kicked the dwarf onto the pyre as well, as you see in this image here. Baldr descends into hell, that is, hell with one L rather than the Christian hell. So this is merely the place of the dead, and there is great lamentation for his loss. Frigga, who is among the Aesir's, that's the high gods, asks who will ride into hell with the goal of bringing Baldr back. Hermod agrees, and he finds Baldr in hell. He petitions the goddess of the underworld for Baldr's release, but she says that she will only let him go if all things in the world, alive or dead, weep for him. Only then will she allow him to return to the Aesir. If anybody speaks against him, or refuses to cry, then he will remain in the domain of hell. Everyone weeps except for one, the Jotun Thok, who is presumed to be Loki in disguise. And so Baldr must remain in hell for now, for it is said that he will walk with the living again, following the cataclysm of Ragnarok. And so there is this prophecy of his end times resurrection. Following the death of most of the gods in Ragnarok, Baldr and Hodr will be released from hell and will be reconciled in the new world, which is not perfect, but it is delivered from the bloodbath of Ragnarok, which is itself a culmination of countless years of conflict. And so this is not eternal paradise, but it is springtime that follows winter, a springtime ushered in, at least in part, by the resurrection of the god of peace, light, and joy. Now, I would be remiss if I did not point out some of the common themes between Baldr and Christ, as this is one of the examples that some people try to point to in making the argument that the Christian account of Christ is just another example of the dying and rising God motif that shows up on multiple occasions in different pagan systems. To this, many well-meaning Christians will instantly go to pointing out the dissimilarities between these accounts, and there are dissimilarities, and so this is well and good, but I actually think that this response misses the most important point. C.S. Lewis discusses this in a few places, but probably most poignantly in his essay, Myth Became Fact, which I'm including in this week's supplemental reading. And this essay is also found in the God in the Dock essay collection, and so if you don't already have that, I definitely recommend that you do pick up that collection. But in this particular essay, he says the following: "Now as myth transcends thought, incarnation transcends myth. The heart of Christianity is a myth which is also a fact. The old myth of the dying God, without ceasing to be a myth, comes down from the heaven of legend and imagination to the earth of history. It happens at a particular date in a particular place, followed by definable historical consequences. We pass from a Baldr or an Osiris, dying nobody knows when or where, to a historical person crucified. It is all in order, under Pontius Pilate. By becoming fact, it does not cease to be myth. That is the miracle. I suspect that men have sometimes derived more spiritual sustenance from myths they did not believe than from the religion they professed. To be truly Christian, we must both assent to the historical fact and receive the myth, fact though it has become, with the same imaginative embrace which we accord to all myths. The one is hardly more necessary than the other." In other words, if the Christian claims regarding Christ are true, if the life, death, and resurrection of Christ is the focal point of history, embedded in the very fibers of reality, if it is true that the Lamb was slain before the foundations of the earth, then would we not expect to see timeless shadows of this reality appear throughout human imaginations? When pre-Christian parallels to Christ are demonstrated, should we not say that this is exactly what we would expect to find? Of course, this is not because the Christ is borrowing from the likes of Baldr, but rather that Baldr and Osiris, and whoever else, is actually borrowing from Christ. Seeds of the Logos are embedded throughout created existence, embedded in the human psyche. They rise up, and they are teleologically directed toward Christ. This is Lewis's basic argument, and I tend to agree. He goes on to say that those who do not know that this great myth became fact when the Virgin conceived are, indeed, to be pitied. But Christians also need to be reminded. We may thank Quirinius for reminding us that what became fact was a myth, that it carries with it into the world of fact all the properties of a myth. God is more than a god, not less. Christ is more than Baldr, not less. We must not be ashamed of the mythical radiance resting on our theology. We must not be nervous about parallels in pagan Christ. They ought to be there. It would be a stumbling block if they weren't. We must not, in false spirituality, withhold our imaginative welcome. If God chooses to be mythopoeic, and is not the sky itself a myth, shall we refuse to be mythopathic? For this is the marriage of heaven and earth, perfect myth and perfect fact, claiming not only our love and our obedience, but also our wonder and delight, addressed to the savage, the child, the poet in each one of us, no less than to the moralist, the scholar, and the philosopher. The myth is a timeless truth, a kind of poetic truth that rises above the world of fact. The gospel is the myth that has become fact, but it has not ceased to be a myth because of this fact. And now I end this lesson with Tegnér's Drapa, a poem by Longfellow on the death of Baldr the Beautiful. I heard a voice that cried, Baldr the Beautiful is dead, and through the misty air passed like the mournful cry of sunward sailing cranes. I saw the pallid corpse of the dead sun, borne through the northern sky. Blasts from Niflheim lifted the sheeted mists around him as he passed. And the voice forever cried, Baldr the Beautiful is dead, and died away through the dreary night in accents of despair. Baldr the Beautiful, god of the summer sun, fairest of all the gods. Light from his forehead beamed, runes were upon his tongue, as on the warrior's sword. All things in earth and air, bound were by magic spell, never to do him harm. Even the plants and stones, all save the mistletoe, the sacred mistletoe. Hodr the blind old god, whose feet are shod with silence, pierced through that gentle breast, with his sharp spear, by fraud, made of the mistletoe, the accursed mistletoe. They laid him in his ship, with horse and harness, as on a funeral pyre. Odin placed a ring upon his finger, and whispered in his ear. They launched the burning ship, it floated far away, over the misty sea, till like the sun it seemed, sinking beneath the waves. Baldr returned no more. So perished the old gods, but out of the sea of time rises a new land of song, fairer than the old. Over its meadows green walk the young bards and sing. Build it again, O ye bards, fairer than before. Ye fathers of the new race, feed upon morning dew, sing the new song of love. The law of force is dead, the law of love prevails. Thor the Thunderer shall rule the earth no more with threats challenge the meek Christ. Sing no more, O ye bards of the north, of Vikings and of Jarls of the days of eld. Preserve the freedom only, not the deeds of blood. Until next time, Godspeed.